They said he was untouchable. 14 assassination attempts. 3 criminal empires built from nothing. An entire underworld that went silent at the mention of his name. Don Shin Jae-won had survived everything this world threw at him. Everything, except what was quietly killing him from the inside. For 3 years he fought alone. In silence. In secret. The way powerful men die, without letting anyone see them bleed. His doctors had given up. His body was surrendering. And the woman sleeping beside him every night, the one he trusted with his life, was the very reason he was dying. He just didn't know it yet. On a stormy Tuesday morning, no different from any other, a maid arrived at his mansion with her little girl. Nobody paid attention to the child. That was their first mistake. Because that little girl wandered down a hallway she was told never to enter, pushed open a door she was told never to touch, knelt beside a man she had never met in her life, and whispered a prayer that stopped heaven in its tracks. She was 6 years old. She didn't know he was dying. She just saw a face she recognized, the same broken, painful face her daddy wore before God took him away. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She prayed. And she left him her last candy. What happened next shocked his doctors, shook his enemies, dismantled a 4-year conspiracy, and turned the most feared man alive into something nobody, including himself, ever expected him to become. This is not a story about power. This is not a story about the mafia. This is a story about what happens when pure innocent love walks into a place where love has never existed. And refuses to leave. This is the story of the Don's candy. There is a loneliness that only the powerful truly understand. Not the loneliness of an empty room. Something heavier. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who fear you, need you, orbit around you like planets around a dying star. And yet not one single soul among them truly knows you. Don Shin Jae-won understood this better than most. By his late 30s he had built an empire across 3 continents. His name silenced rooms. Governments whispered about him in closed meetings. 14 men had been sent to end his life across 20 years. Every single one had failed. He was, by every measure the world uses, untouchable. And yet, every night when the last bodyguard took his post and the last call ended, Don Shin would sit alone on the edge of his bed in the dark and press his hand flat against his chest. Just to feel his own heartbeat. Just to confirm he was still there. Because for 3 years, he had not been entirely sure how many heartbeats he had left. It had started quietly. The way the most dangerous things always do. A tiredness he couldn't shake. A pain that came and went like a ghost. He ignored it the way powerful men ignore inconvenient truths. With discipline, with the absolute refusal to be anything other than what the world needed him to be. But the body does not negotiate with power. Dr. Kong had delivered the verdict carefully. The way doctors deliver death in palatable portions. Your survival probability is less than 12%. He told nobody. Not Park Dae-ho, who would have burned the world down for him. Not his most trusted men. Not Yuna, the woman sleeping beside him every night saying all the right things. What he didn't know was that Yuna already knew. Because she was the reason. But that revelation hadn't arrived yet. So he carried it all. The empire, the illness, the loneliness. In the silence of a man who had decided that dying alone was simply the price of the life he chose. His mother had warned him once. In a small kitchen smelling of sesame oil she had held his young face and said, Jae-won, you can build yourself a kingdom. But a kingdom with no love in it is just a very expensive prison. He had laughed. Kissed her forehead. Told her she worried too much. She was gone 6 months later. And he had been building his expensive prison ever since. He didn't know it yet, but across the city a woman was putting her little girl to bed. A little girl with curious eyes, a pocket full of candy, and a habit of wandering into places she had no business being. In less than 48 hours, she would wander into his. And nothing would ever be the same again. There is a strength that never makes the headlines. It doesn't come with bodyguards or mahogany desks. It wakes up at 5:30 in the morning. It fixes 2 pigtails in a bathroom mirror with hands that are tired but never careless. It kisses a small forehead, whispers a quiet prayer nobody else hears, and steps out into whatever weather the day has decided to throw at it. That was Lana Williams. Every single day she kept going. She was 34. Breathtakingly beautiful in a way that didn't announce itself. warm eyes carrying African depth and something softer inherited from her mother. The quiet dignity of a woman who has walked through fire and decided it would not burn away who she was. 2 years since Marcus died. 2 years since the hospital. Since the words that split her life into a before and an after with no map for the second half. Her husband had been 36. A good man. Though. He had held her hand at the very end and said, "Make sure Zoe knows I went looking for God with everything I had." She hadn't cried in front of him. She saved that for the parking lot, both hands over her mouth so nobody would hear. That was the kind of woman she was. Zoe had been 4 when her father died. Old enough that his absence had a shape. An empty chair, Sunday mornings that used to be full of his off-key singing. She had learned not to ask where her mother went in the still moments. She simply climbed into her lap and waited. At 6 years old, Zoe Williams was the most emotionally intelligent person in any room she entered. She saw through surfaces. She noticed what people hid behind their smiles. She also wandered into places she had absolutely no business being. Lana was still working on that. The Tuesday that changed everything began like every other Tuesday. Until the babysitter cancelled. Lana knelt down and held Zoe's face in both hands. "You do not wander. You do not touch anything. You do not go near Mr. Shin's room. Promise me." Zoe placed her small hand on her chest with great solemnity. "I promise, Mommy." 20 minutes later, Lana walked back to the staff room. Coloring book open. Snacks untouched. Yellow raincoat folded neatly on the chair. Zoe was gone. Somewhere deep in the corridor Lana was never permitted to enter. Past the koi fish tank, past the stern paintings, past 20 years of cold empty silence. A little girl in light-up sneakers was already pushing open a door she had been told never to touch. Swiftly. The way children knock when they aren't sure if someone is sleeping. Heaven has always had a sense of humor about instructions. Something pulled Zoe down the corridor. Not curiosity, something quieter. Like a hand she couldn't see, gently placed between her small shoulder blades, walking her somewhere she needed to be. She followed it. At the end, a door. Slightly open. A thin blade of warm light falling across the dark floor like a quiet invitation. She pushed it open with 2 small fingers. A large man lay in an enormous bed. His face, that face the world knew as stone and ice, creased with the quiet involuntary honesty that only sleep pulls from people. He looked exhausted. He looked like he had been fighting something enormous for a very long time. He looked exactly like her daddy. She tiptoed in without hesitation. She knelt beside his bed, exactly the way her mother taught her. Hands clasped, thumbs crossed, chin slightly down. The posture of a child who has been taught that prayer is not performance. Prayer is simply turning to face the one who is always already listening. She closed her eyes. "Dear God, there's a man here who really hurts inside. Just like my daddy did. Please don't let him die like my daddy. He looks lonely too, God. Like nobody has been nice to him in a really long time. Please send him somebody to love him. Everybody needs somebody to love them." Don Shin lay half awake. Every word cut through 20 years of armor and landed somewhere deep and raw and forgotten. A tear slid silently into his pillow. "And God, tell my daddy I said hi. Tell him Mommy is doing really good even when she's sad. Tell him I eat my vegetables now." Pause. Mostly. Something cracked inside the most dangerous man in the city. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just cracked. The way beautiful things crack when they have been held together by will alone for too long and something real finally touches them. Amen. The small fingers wrapping his large ones. One by one. Carefully. Around something small and smooth and wrapped in crinkly paper. Holding his closed hand for just one moment. Then letting go. The soft pad of small feet. The flash of pink light. Silence. Don Shin opened his hand. A candy. Yellow paper. A small flower on the side. Still warm from a child's pocket. He pressed it against his chest. Against the place he pressed every night to confirm he was still there. And for the first time in longer than he could remember. Don Shin Jae-won wept. Not one controlled tear. Completely. Silently. With his whole chest. Like a man who has been carrying something so long he forgot it wasn't always there. And someone just lifted it. There are things in this world that science cannot explain. Moments that sit outside the borders of everything we have decided is possible. Daring us to look directly at them without looking away. Most people look away. Shin Jae-won was not a humble man. But he was about to become one. He found Zoe in the garden 3 days later. He came around the bench, looked at him, looked at the space beside him, and sat down. No introduction. No hesitation. The complete naturalness of a child who has decided a bench is an appropriate place to sit. Shin looked at her. She looked at the garden. In that silence he felt something he had not felt in 20 years. Company. Simple. Weightless. Entirely uncomplicated. You were in my room, he said quietly. Yes, Zoe said. Honest. Unapologetic. Why? She looked at him with those eyes. The eyes that saw past surfaces without trying. Because you looked like my daddy, she said simply. He died. He had the same face you have. What face is that? She studied him carefully. The face of somebody fighting really hard but getting really tired. Shin had no response. A 6-year-old had just described, with devastating precision, the interior experience he had never shared with another living soul. How old are you? He asked. 6, Zoe said. And 3/4. The 3/4 is important. Something moved across his face. Are you going to eat breakfast? She asked. My mommy says sick people need to eat breakfast. The word landed like a stone in still water. Sick. Shin went very still. Who told you? He stopped. Searched her face for the angle. The pipeline. The explanation. Because in his world there was always an explanation. But this face had no angle. No strategy. Just candy stains and one loose pigtail and a child saying exactly what she saw. Nobody told you, he said slowly. Nobody tells me things, Zoe agreed pleasantly. I just see them. Zoe, he said carefully. What else do you see? She looked at him, full, unhurried, and said it. Quietly. The way you say something you simply know. You're going to be okay. The thing hurting you inside is going to go away. God told me when I was praying for you. She scrunched her face slightly. You just can't feel it yet. Shin stopped breathing. He had told nobody. Not one person on this earth. Not his doctors. Not Park Dae-ho. Not the woman sleeping beside him for 4 years. Nobody. And yet here, on a garden bench, a 6-year-old with candy stains on her shirt was telling him with the calm certainty of a weather forecast that he was going to be okay. He stared at her so long she tilted her head with mild concern. Are you okay, Mr. Shin? He reached for his phone. Called Dr. Kong. Move my appointment. This week. As soon as possible. He hung up. Zoe nodded with quiet approval. Good, she said. Eat breakfast first though. And Shin Jae-won, who had not taken instruction from another human being in 20 years, went inside and ate breakfast. There is a waiting that has no equal. Not traffic. Not delayed flights. This waiting happens in a plastic chair outside a closed door when the information on the other side has the power to either extend your world or confirm its ending. Shin had sat in this chair 11 times in 3 years. Today felt different. He reached into his pocket. 2 candies. Yellow wrappers. Small flowers. He closed his fist around them and waited. Dr. Kong had practiced medicine for 31 years. He had delivered devastating news hundreds of times. He had mastered the medical face. Steady, measured, the calm at the center of whatever storm the results had created. He had never walked into a consultation with shaking hands. Until today. He had run the tests 3 times. Not because the equipment failed. Because the results sitting in front of him were telling him, clearly, loudly, without ambiguity, that what he was looking at should not exist. Shin saw the face in the doorway and knew immediately. Something was wrong with it. Not the careful professional neutral of 11 previous consultations. Something else entirely. The face of a man standing in front of something that does not fit inside any of his filing systems. They sat across the desk that had held 3 years of bad news. Have you sought treatment elsewhere? Anything outside what I prescribed? Nothing, Shin said. Dr. Kong slid the file across the desk. Shin looked down. 3 years had given him a brutal literacy in the language of his own decline. He knew what bad looked like. He knew what worse looked like. What he was reading now was neither. Every marker reversed. The deterioration that had moved in one unbroken direction for 36 months. Not paused, not slowed. Reversed. Shin, Dr. Kong said, and 31 years of professional composure was simply gone. You are healing. Not stabilizing. Not responding to treatment. Actively, completely healing. I cannot explain this. 3 words landed like light into a room that had been dark for 3 years. Full recovery. Don Shin walked out without speaking. Through the corridor. Through the lobby. Through the glass doors into the gray morning. He reached his car. He sat. He opened his fist. 2 candies. Yellow wrappers. Small flowers. One for what God already did. One for what he's still doing. He thought about a dark room. Small fingers wrapping his one by one. A child who didn't know his name kneeling on a cold floor talking to God about a dying stranger. You're going to be okay. The healing is already happening. You just can't feel it yet. He could feel it now. Don Shin pressed both hands against his face. And wept. Not one controlled tear. Everything. The full release of a man who accepted his own death, and just had it handed back to him by a 6-year-old's prayer. He sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Then he picked up his phone. Park. Full security report on Lana Williams's neighborhood. Tonight. He started the car. He already knew what he had to do next. Evil rarely announces itself. This is what fairy tales get wrong. We were raised on the vocabulary of monsters. Darkness, ugliness, the clear identifiable face of something that means us harm. Nobody prepared us for the other kind. The kind that smells of expensive perfume. The kind that knows exactly how you take your tea. The kind that learned your routines, your silences, your soft places. Not because it loved you, but because knowing those things was the most efficient way to end you. Yuna had been 28 when Chairman Bei selected her. The offer was simple. Enter Don Shin's life. Become indispensable. Learn its interior. And when the time came, ensure he did not survive. Fully. Quietly. In a way that looked like nature rather than design. She agreed. She told herself it was business. She told herself that for 4 years. What she hadn't anticipated was Don Shin himself. Not the power, she had been around powerful men. But the version that existed in the 3 in the morning silences. The man pressing his hand to his chest in the dark. Touching his mother's photograph when nobody was watching. Who was beneath everything he had constructed. Simply lonely. She had not been prepared to recognize it. She poured his tea every evening anyway. The substance came from Chairman Bei through a chain too carefully insulated to trace. It didn't poison dramatically. It simply encouraged, amplifying what already existed, pushing his body slowly, incrementally, in one specific direction. 3 years. Every evening. In his tea. While she held his hand at events. While she said all the right things. While she slept beside him as he lay awake counting heartbeats. Thursday evening. The house quiet. The corridor empty. She reached into her robe. Removed the vial. Glanced at the doorway. Nobody watching. She was not alone. Behind the kitchen island, knees pulled up, light-up sneakers perfectly still, was Zoe. She had come looking for the candy bowl. She watched through the gap beneath the counter. The hand going into the pocket. The small glass thing coming out. Yuna checking the doorway, looking around first, before tipping it into the cup. Zoe felt something. She couldn't name it at 6 years old. But it felt exactly the way her mother's face felt on days she was sad but saying she was fine. Wrong on the inside. Right on the outside. She watched Yuna carry the cup toward Don Shin's study. Steady. Graceful. Entirely ordinary. As she always did. Zoe crawled out from behind the island. Smoothed her pajamas. And went to find Mr. Shin. She picked up his tea with both hands and carried it to the windowsill behind the curtain. Out of reach. Out of sight. Then she sat in the doorway and waited. Where is my tea? Don Shin asked. I moved it. Why? She looked at him with both hands in her lap. The pretty lady put something from a little bottle into it. She looked at the door first to make sure nobody was watching. She paused. My mommy says people who look around before they do something are hiding it. The room went completely silent. Don Shin looked at this child, who had now saved his life twice without understanding what she was doing. He looked toward the door. Park. Park Dae-ho appeared instantly. One look passed between them. 15 years of language requiring no words. Tonight, Don Shin said. Yes, Don. There is a pain that has no clean name. Not grief. Not betrayal. Something beneath both. The pain of revision. Of sitting with everything you believed about a chapter of your life, and watching it rewrite itself from the very beginning. Every shared silence reinterpreted. Every evening she poured his tea, seen now for exactly what it was. Don Shin received the full report at 2 a.m. Park Dae-ho placed it on the desk and stood in the doorway in silence. Because 15 years had taught him that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer a man is simply the refusal to leave while he absorbs the unabsorbable. It was all there. The recruitment. The timeline. The specific date. 3 weeks before Yuna first appeared in his life. Not chance. Not fate. Place. The substance. Designed not to announce itself. Not to shock or spike or trigger investigation. Designed simply to encourage. Pushing his body quietly, incrementally over 3 years, toward an ending that would look entirely natural. He closed the folder. He thought about the morning after the diagnosis. Her hand on his back. All the right words. Delivered by a woman who already knew. As she was the reason. The confrontation was quiet. Don Shin stood in the center of the room and looked at her and said one word. Don't. 4 years of performance collapsed. She confessed everything. Chairman Bay. The arrangement. 3 years of poison delivered every evening in a cup she carried to him with steady, graceful hands. When she finished, Don Shin straightened his jacket and walked out. At the door he paused. The 4 years, he said quietly, to the air, to the part of him that would carry this regardless. I believed them. Silence. I know, Yuna said. The only honest thing she had said in 4 years. He left the room. He sat in his study until sunrise. He thought about 3 years of dying from something placed in his glass by hands he trusted. About pressing his palm to his chest in the dark, while the reason for his uncertainty breathed steadily beside him. He opened his desk drawer. The first candy. Yellow paper. Small flower. Still wrapped. He held it. Then he reached for his phone. Park. The security report on Lana Williams. I want it on my desk this morning. He set the phone down. He went to eat breakfast. There is a courage that never gets celebrated. It doesn't stand on stages or get written about in histories. It wakes up at 5:30. It shows up without fail. It does its work with quiet dignity and asks for nothing beyond what it is owed. For 2 years, Lana Williams had been that courage. And Don Shin Jae-won was only just beginning to understand what the word actually meant. He read the security report differently this morning. Same data. Same neighborhood. Same incident logs. But this time he read it as a 6-year-old girl walking home through streets that had no business being her backdrop. He read it as a widow holding what remained of her life together with her own 2 hands in a place doing its quiet best to make that impossible. He called Park Dae-ho. What time does she arrive on Tuesdays? 9. She has never been late. In 2 years, Don Shin said slowly. Never. Never. Bring her to the study before she starts. Lana sat across from him. Composed. Guarded. The quiet dignity of a woman who has been through enough to know that dropping your eyes is something you do when you have something to be ashamed of. She did not. Don Shin looked at her. Really looked, perhaps for the first time. A woman who had served his house faithfully through grief and exhaustion without complaint or fanfare. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance. He told her everything. The prayer. The miracle. The kitchen. The vial. The child who had saved his life twice without understanding what she was doing. When he finished, Lana's composure shifted. Not broke. Shifted. She never told me, she whispered. Not a word. She didn't think she'd done anything remarkable. Don Shin said. That is the thing about your daughter. He slid the security report across the desk. Your neighborhood is not safe. The East Wing has been empty for 3 years. You and Zoe will move in. Your salary is tripled. This is not charity. Lana's pride rose immediately. She opened her mouth. The study door burst open. Zoe, having clearly been eavesdropping, threw both arms in the air. Mommy. The fish tank is the size of a wall. Please, Mommy, please. Don Shin looked at Lana. Something in his eyes was no longer the Don. Just a man. Asking. Lana looked at her daughter. Looked at him. And nodded. He found Zoe in the east corridor pressing both palms against the fish tank, fogging it with her breath, delivering a detailed status report on a large orange koi she had named Gerald. Don Shin crouched down to her eye level. How would you feel about that room? The one with the fish. Zoe's eyes went wide. She looked at the tank. Looked at him. Looked at the tank again. To sleep in, she whispered. To sleep in. The sound she made filled the entire corridor, bouncing off cold walls and stern paintings and 20 years of empty silence. Pure. Uncontainable. Joy. Don Shin stood. He looked at Park Dae-ho over Zoe's head. On the face of a man who had communicated in silences for 15 years, was something unmistakable. Joy. A house can be full of people and still be empty. Empty of the specific irreplaceable quality that turns square footage into something else entirely. The quality of being lived in. Loved in. Of containing somewhere within its walls the ordinary, extraordinary evidence of people who belong to each other. Don Shin's mansion had been waiting for this quality for 20 years. It arrived on a Saturday morning. In 2 suitcases, 1 frog-shaped backpack and Zoe's pocket, already full of candy. The transformation began with drawings. Zoe had very specific ideas about where they should go. Don Shin, who had not been consulted on his own walls in 20 years, found himself standing in the east corridor while a 6-year-old held a drawing of a fish wearing a crown against the dark paneling. Is it straight? He studied it with the focus he usually reserved for intelligence reports. Higher, he said. She moved it up. Now Gerald can see himself, she said, applying the tape with great seriousness. Otherwise, how does he know he's getting too big? Don Shin looked at the cold gray seascape hanging beside it, purchased 11 years ago because someone said it was the right kind of thing to have. I'll have that painting removed, he said. Zoe looked at him with approval. I'll make you something better. What's your favorite color? He considered this, perhaps for the first time since he was her age. Blue, he said. Blue with fish, she confirmed, and walked off to find her drawing supplies. The first real conversation with Lana happened in the garden. She came out with 2 cups of tea and sat beside him under the magnolia tree without being asked. Not close, a respectful distance. Both of them looking forward. The comfortable silence of 2 people who have learned that silence shared is one of the rarest things available. My husband used to say, Lana said quietly, that a house becomes a home the moment someone puts something on the wall they actually love. She paused. He kept a drawing of mine through 3 apartments. Wrapped it carefully every time we moved. Where is it now? In a box, she said. I couldn't put it up after he died. Don Shin was quiet for a moment. There is a wall in the east corridor, he said. Currently empty. Because the painting that was on it was removed. Lana looked at him. Why was it removed? Someone told me it wasn't the right kind of thing for that wall. And then, in Don Shin's garden under the magnolia tree, Lana Williams laughed. The real one. Warm and full and completely unguarded. Don Shin looked at her. He did not look away. He sat in the sound of it, and felt something step fully into the room that had been waiting at the edge of his awareness for months. He looked back at the magnolia tree. He said nothing. But 3 miles away, a man was looking at a photograph. A stone bench. 2 cups of tea. A woman laughing beside the most dangerous man alive. Chairman Bay set the photograph down. Not him, he said quietly. The child. And the woman. Find me a window. The things that matter most in this life announce their value through what you are willing to do to keep them. Don Shin had known his answer for a while. He was simply waiting for the world to ask the question. It happened on a Wednesday. A quiet, ordinary, entirely unremarkable Wednesday. The 30-second window between the school gate and the car door. That was all Chairman Bay needed. Park Dae-ho came through the study door and Don Shin knew before a single word was spoken. Zoe, he said. Not a question. Park Dae-ho's jaw tightened. They want a meeting. Tonight. She has not been harmed. Don Shin stood. Where is Lana? She was at the fish tank. Both palms pressed against the glass. Forehead almost touching it. Her eyes on Gerald. Enormous, silent, present. With the unseeing focus of a mother whose mind is somewhere she cannot reach. Don Shin stood beside her. She did not look at him. Tell me, she said. He told her. Hurry. Without softening it beyond what honesty permitted. Because Lana Williams was not a woman who needed information managed for her. When he finished, silence. She's frightened, Lana said. Not a question. A mother stating fact. Yes, he said quietly. She pressed her forehead fully against the glass. Eyes closed. The extraordinary invisible effort of a woman holding herself together by pure will. Then she opened her eyes, lifted her head, turned and looked at him, clear, present, decided. Get her back, she said. 3 words. The full instruction. Placed in his hands with the complete trust of a woman who has never placed anything in anyone's hands and is trusting, completely, that these are the right ones. Yes, he said. What happened that night was not for this narrator to describe. What can be said is this. There is a difference between a man fighting for an empire and a man fighting for a child. The first has calculation. The second has no ceiling. By 3 in the morning it was finished. Zoe came through the door wrapped in Park Dae-ho's enormous jacket, sleeves hanging past her hands, and found her mother. The sound Lana made was not a word. It was something older than language. The specific sound of a mother receiving her child back from a place she was never supposed to go. I prayed the whole time, Mommy, Zoe said into her shoulder. I knew somebody was coming. Lana held her tighter and came completely apart. Don Shin stood in the entrance hall watching them. He reached into his pocket. The second candy. Yellow wrapper. Small flower. Soft with being carried through every season of this extraordinary year. He walked to Lana. He held it out. She looked at it. Looked at him. She prayed for you to have a family, Lana said softly. That night in your room. She asked God to send you somebody to love you. Don Shin went still. She didn't know, Lana whispered, that she was also asking for you for us. Zoe wriggled free and walked straight to Don Shin and wrapped both arms around him, as much of him as she could reach. He crouched down. He held her. I knew you'd come, she said into his shoulder. I told Mr. Park. I said you'd always come. Always, he said. The full promise. When he looked up, Lana was watching with her hand over her mouth and her eyes full of everything, none of it managed, all of it present. He stood. He looked at her across the entrance hall. She stepped forward. She placed her hand flat against his chest, the same gesture he had made alone in the dark for 3 years, pressing to confirm what was still there. He put his hand over hers. And they stood like that. While Zoe, already in the fish tank corridor, conducted a full welfare check on Gerald. While Park Dae-ho followed her silently. While the city outside continued its enormous indifferent business. While the magnolia tree stood in the garden as it had always stood. Still there. More there, perhaps, than it had ever been.